The very concept of historical fiction is an oxymoron. Fiction is, by definition, a flight of fancy, the imagination given form. History is fact, set in stone, our true past. To deviate from history puts it straight into fiction. There's no balance between the two, no spectrum. When we say historical fiction, there's an unwritten understanding between the creator and audience that, while certain efforts have been made to attain accuracy to the time period and the characters, the main purpose of the work is to entertain. If there has to be some tweaking or culling of the facts to make for more impactful storytelling, then so be it. And yet, there are those who would like to see the author held to the same standards as the historian, with all anachronisms ironed out, twisted truths unknotted, and every facet of the facts bolted into place. Everything else is a failure, a disrespect to the source material. The Imitation game was no exception to criticism. While it was largely hailed as excellent upon release in 2014, there were still the usual voices decrying the falsehoods in the movie, that Alan Turing was actually quite a sociable person, that the true name of the Enigma machine was not Christopher, but Victory, that the project was not run on by a small crack team of geniuses working on a single machine, but it was a project that involved thousands of people, multiple machines, and Alan Turing stepped in midway through the project. That the chemical castration didn't directly result in Turing's suicide, that he was off the stuff 14 months before he died, and even then, it's not entirely clear if he committed suicide or not. Now, I am not at all saying that the people who point out these inconsistencies are wrong, or that they should simply enjoy the story for what it is. Certainly, all due diligence should be made in the research phase of the story, and to respect the facts. And I'm definitely not saying that historical fiction, as a source of entertainment, has no duty to inform. It certainly does, and those who point out the inaccuracies help to push us all to a higher standard. But there has to be a reasonable limit on just how much a storyteller can be expected to follow the facts. The reason is twofold. Firstly, to be blunt, a storyteller's job is to tell a story. A story's job is to entertain, and anything learned from it is a happy bonus. Why don't we hold historians to the same standard? That they must present their facts in a pleasing and readable narrative. Sure, some historians are gifted storytellers with a knack for making a potentially dry history lesson of the past a joy, but the difference between the two is stark. We happily forgive history books if they are as dull and readable as a dictionary. Indeed, we praise history books like that as being the real deal, the pedigree authority on our history. And yet, if a historical fiction book or movie gives a character a fabric type that isn't invented for the next 73 years, or they give the villain a gun that was never made available outside of South America, then you can bet that the creator is going to hear from some very unhappy people. We should be more sympathetic to the storyteller who has clearly at least tried harder than the historian who can't and won't make their work more digestible. Secondly, as the storyteller, the author is well versed in, and has a duty to, make the story work. Let's face it, despite there being many strange and wonderful true stories of drama, terror, excitement, and wonder in the world, very few of them would translate perfectly into a story. Stories in real life have similarities, yes, but the differences are key to understanding why storytellers make the changes they do. Stories have to hit certain emotional beats, have clear beginnings and endings, keep a certain level of tension and pacing, have an antagonistic force for the main character to play off of. Simply put, real life does not have an audience to keep in rapt attention. A story does, and when retelling a true story, certain adjustments and sacrifices have to be made to keep the audience engaged. Let's look at the differences between the fact and fiction of the Imitation Game again. So in the movie, Alan Turing basically has Asperger's. He may not have been like that in real life, although he was indeed a private person. But can you imagine the story if the Enigma crew got on perfectly well from the outset? It would seem too easy, and Alan wouldn't have the scope to develop as a character. Now again, you can argue that character development of Alan isn't true to the real man, but this is what engages an audience. A protagonist who stays the same throughout does not a satisfying narrative make. Same with the naming of the machine. Naming it after Alan's childhood friend gives it that extra emotional oomph, and that has a great payoff towards the end of the movie. Now his death is probably the most contentious discrepancy, and I can understand why. It is argued that Alan Turing's time on chemical castration wasn't that bad for him, and his death was a separate issue with an unclear cause. To be blunt, if this had been played out in the movie, it would have been an anticlimactic mess. Imagine it. After completion of the Enigma machine, Alan Turing is arrested for homosexual acts. He's put on a program of corrective medicine that doesn't impact him that badly, then he dies of an indirect cause a couple of years later. Credits roll. It wouldn't work. Stories require payoff, closure. You can see the thinking of the creators when they were deciding how to get the right impact without sacrificing the integrity of the story. Clearly, a happy ending would be disastrous. Alan Turing's story could only ever end in tragedy. Having Turing's story, not life, but story, end on a clear suicide as a direct result of the chemical castration gives the story clear closure. It deals an emotional blow to the audience and puts one of the core themes of the story and of Alan Turing's real life into sharp relief, that of homosexuality. Of course, it can be done badly. There's countless examples out there of poorly researched historical fiction that plays fast and loose with the facts. The key thing here is respect for the source material. In my opinion, The Imitation Game is not just a good story, but also good historical fiction, because it manages to tell a story while staying true to the spirit of Alan Turing's life and work. The facts can be respected without being mimicked. The alterations don't compromise the integrity of the truth. In many respects, the alterations can enhance and bring focus to the truth, to the points that matter. While it may have been true that the Enigma project was the work of a much larger group of men and women, showing the group as being a much smaller, concentrated effort brings the attention squarely onto Turing. And let's be clear here, tweaking the facts to make digestible, audience-friendly historical fiction is by no means selling out. Good historical fiction leaves the audience in one of two mindsets. They're either feeling intrigued enough to go off and learn more, or they never look up anything further on the topic, but the movie or book leaves them with an impression more or less aligned with the historians, i.e., in the case of The Imitation Game, that Turing was a genius, unfairly persecuted for his sexuality and taken before his time. In the case of the former, this is wonderful because it piques the interest and drives the viewer or reader to investigate and read up on the real deal. This is easier than it has ever been, thanks to everyone having immediate access to the knowledge of the world through a device in our pockets. It's easier than ever to get informed. And in the case of the latter, it is also good news because you have a casual viewer or reader who would have otherwise never been informed, yet thanks to a movie or book now possesses a sketch of the facts without being grossly uninformed. Either way, historical fiction brings important benefits to opening the eyes of an audience to the work of a person, a time in history, a tragedy, or a great battle that they would otherwise never have known about. Historical fiction faces unique challenges in striking a balance between telling an impactful story while respecting the facts. While every truth should While every effort should be made to present the truth, it must be understood that its main purpose is to tell a story. Done well, historical fiction can be an effective primer for the masses and a gateway to encourage looking into the real deal. And I have learned a lot about Alan Turing since watching The Imitation Game. And that's it for today's showcase. Thank you very much for listening. The written version of this is on my website, the link of which is in the description just below, along with links to all of my other websites, blogs, social media, and also my Patreon if you wish to support my work. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.